Let's go back to our gallery now and our political editor, Jane Patterson. Hi, Jane. The Prime Minister was out and about, out of her bubble today, travelling just a little bit, but it seems that we're not going to be able to go too far afield. She was asked about the Trans-Tasman bubble again. What did she have to say?
That's right, Lisa. So the Prime Minister going out to Welltech, a trades training institute just outside of Wellington, as her first post-budget and first outing, as you say, since the lockdown. We talked about the Trans-Tasman bubble, partly off the back of concerns from the tourism sector today, really worried about the lack of direct funding for them in the budget, with the $400 million package but not in any direct cash grants. So they were talking about a sense of certainty in terms of that Trans-Tasman bubble, travel bubble potentially opening up. So Ms Ardern said that they still have quite a lot of work to do. She wouldn't put a time frame on it. She said that it would not be within weeks, but it could be within months. And she also made the point that it's not just New Zealand that has to sort things from its side, but it also has to be Australia. Now, she did allude to the public health aspect, so the ongoing low number or zero number of cases in New Zealand sounds like that's going to be critical, and I'm sure the same will apply over the Tasman. But she was meeting this afternoon with people, including Adrian Littlewood from Auckland Airport, just to talk about exactly what New Zealand would have to do to make that happen. But I wouldn't take any further signs in terms of how soon that's going to happen. It still sounds like it's some way off.
And the other thing is this controversial legislation governing the rules around the level 2 lockdown. And this is where police can enter homes without a warrant. So it is going to get some further scrutiny. What's happening with it?
So this legislation was introduced to Parliament earlier this week on Tuesday, and Parliament went into urgency and debated it over Tuesday and Wednesday morning. And it really sets out the broad framework, the legal framework that police can use to enforce level 2 powers. And the concerns were basically that the powers were so broad, so effectively it gives the police warrantless powers to go into dwellings, go into private dwellings, to check if there are gatherings of more than 10 people. Now, the government said this was justified in terms of the public health imperative, but the main concerns were that it was being passed under urgency, under such a rush. The opposition didn't have time to really scrutinise it, and there were already drafting errors picked up in it. For example, contract tracing rather than contact tracing, which often happens, as we've seen, when law is rushed through. So the Act is in place now. It's on the statute books, and it will be for another 2 years, but it will be reviewed, or actually have to be renewed, by Parliament every 90 days. So what the Attorney-General has said today, he has agreed to send it to a select committee so it can go through that not only public consultation process, but to have the scrutiny in terms of that the law is written properly and doesn't have any big loopholes. So that will happen in time for the select committee to report back by July the 27th, and that means that MPs will have a little bit more information about that law before they renew it, or not at that point.
So it's going to the Finance and Expenditure Committee. What is the makeup of that committee? How's it weighted?
It'll be a government majority. It is headed by a Labour MP, so there wouldn't be any problems in terms of getting any recommendations through. And remember too that recommendations from Select Committee are not binding on the government. It really is, strong advice, but the Select Committee can't come back, for example, and say, we recommend that this law be scrapped. Now, it could come back with that recommendation, but the government can either decide to accept that advice or not. So this is more, it's not so much about changing the law itself in entirety. It's more about having a good look at it, seeing if there are areas for improvement, and providing that advice to the House.
Just before we go to the headlines, Jane, I'm just wondering, the wage subsidy, tourism wanted it to be pushed out longer than 2 months. Any suggestion that the Prime Minister is flexible on that?
It sounded today, Lisa, more like any extension of the wage subsidy would be contained in sector-specific packages. So tourism, of course, came up, aviation is another one, and hospitality. But the Prime Minister seemed to indicate, when asked about the extension, that they wouldn't be in a broader scheme, even like there is now for another 8 weeks for companies hit with a 50% drop in revenue. But post that when that wage subsidy extension ends in 8 weeks, it'll be in specific sector support packages. So the government is really looking to target that spending in the coming months.
Thank you, Jane. That is Jane Patterson, our political editor.